Hi, and welcome to Dark Window. I'm your host, Jim Mann. Here on this program, I will be talking with many of the leading investigators, researchers, and authors on the topics of UFOs, UAPs, alien abductions, extraterrestrials, and a host of many other fascinating and related topics. So please join me and my guest for the next hour as we reach out. This is Dark Window on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. And hello, everyone. I am your host, Jim Mann. Welcome to Dark Window. I have a very special guest with me here in the studio tonight. Is Dr. Cay Randell-May. Not only is she a very learned and experienced lady in numerous disciplines, she's also a friend of mine. She is an internationally recognized intuitive with specialties in medical intuition and scientific technical intuition for more than 40 years. Cay has a diverse background incorporating intuition, science, philosophy, religion, metaphysics, and art. She conducts intuitive readings with clients throughout the world. Now, she has also been an active member with the Mutual UFO Network for many years. She was a past field investigator and originally a field investigator with APRO, and a keen interest in the potential for universal life. Now, Cay has also attended many universities and colleges throughout the country. Again, she has earned her PhD from places like Arizona State University, from Berkeley, from many other universities. She has taught at many of the local universities and colleges and campuses right here in Phoenix. And I want to say this one last thing before we get into our conversation. Cay is also a minister at a large sort of an international council for community churches, and is a past president of the National Women's Christian Fellowship through the same organization. So she's a very, very diverse lady. And Cay, welcome to our program. How are you tonight?
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much for having me on a Dark Window. I'm excited about your program and the opportunity to meet people in your audience and to address some of the questions that might bring a little bit of light into those darker corners of our understanding, which I understand is the mission of your program.
Yes, Cay, you're a fascinating lady. I've known you for years. As I was the state director for the Mutual UFO Network right here in Arizona, you were one of our field investigators, and you were a very good field investigator. So I thought it was great to have you on the show tonight. And I tell you what, I have a ton of questions for you if you have a ton of answers.
Absolutely. But just one moment, just to hit upon that topic. If
Mhm.
anyone should be interested in being a field investigator for MUFON, I highly recommend it. It requires study, it requires application, but oh, the rewards are great. And it is a privilege to be right there on the front line gathering information about the unknown.
And it's fun, right? It's
Oh,
fun.
it's fun. It's great fun.
It's
It's an
pretty fun.
adventure, and I
Mhm.
recommend it to anyone.
Well, yeah, so do I. Now, Cay, we're going to talk a bit about human consciousness here tonight. And wow, that is a deep subject, and you are the person to talk to. And so, to get the ball rolling here, I'm going to ask, um, what is the range or the scope of human consciousness that you have studied throughout the years?
Clearly, as a biologist, Jim, I have come from the perspective of science, of mainstream science, where we think of consciousness as limited to our physical senses, and sound and taste and touch and all of those things that we've heard about. And of course, naturally, the physical brain. And we know that if something happens to the physical brain, a person unfortunately has an accident or they have some kind of incident, uh, of course, their cognition, their ability to think and reason is affected. But there is far more to consciousness than what can be explained in our usual biological textbooks. That is only one aspect. And as someone who has worked throughout my entire life with what is called extended sensory perception, which includes clairvoyance, remote viewing, all kinds of visualizations, and intuitive work in general, I can tell you that it's possible to have consciousness extended beyond the five physical senses. And that's why it's generally called high sense perception or extended sensory perception.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really interesting, and um, I know I've looked at your books, or one of your books anyway. I'm trying to remember. I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember the name of it.
The
Um,
book that you're referring to is Inner Visions of Matter
yes,
and Subtle
yes, thank you.
Energy.
Yes.
This was published in 2014, but it was based upon many, many years of study, which I have done not only on my own, but with a range of other scientific colleagues. In this process that we use, I go into deep altered state consciousness and access information, drawing pictures, getting very detailed scientific analyses and scientific information about machinery, some of it that has not yet been invented. And we're able to work with my scientific colleagues to bring some of those things into the physical realm, concepts and other things. So it is a way of using, what can I say, peering into the possible and coming up with some very probable and actual information. Because my scientific colleagues will then follow through and experiment and actually carry my ideas and my visions into the physical.
You know, Kay, one of the things that has always fascinated me, and that is why has it been said that it's necessary to understand the nature of matter and energy in order to understand consciousness? Can you kind of explain that?
Absolutely. It's the central question, the central issue of our understanding. When I was a little girl and took physics back in high school in prehistoric times, I'm not that old, but it was a long time ago. I was taught a version of physics called Newtonian physics. And Newtonian physics really did not understand the true nature of matter and didn't really explain it. Since that time, there have been many, many, many advances in the understanding of matter from the physics point of view. What I have seen through my intuition is that all matter, every material atom, every subdivision of the atom takes form in the physical realm and then becomes pure energy and then takes form again and then becomes pure energy. And this change we call quantum physics. This change occurs billions of times per second. So that means matter is formed and then becomes pure energy and then is formed again. So during the time, let's say time, during the percentage of existence that an atom is physical, it clearly is distinct and in itself separate from other atoms. But that percentage of existence that that atom is pure energy, it's all one with all other atoms. So consciousness derives from this shared, I call it a mind field, that then precipitates or formed again into the synapses, the neurons, and all of the other cells and components of our physical brain. Our thoughts are limited by our synapses or the connection between our neurons. And we have a memory, those connections change, they mutate, they move around, they morph,
Mhm.
and they are limited though by the physical connections. But in the pure energetic percentage of existence of matter, all information is one. You and I are one in that level, Jim. So the issue becomes, how do we retrieve that connection? And that is where the work of intuition comes. Those people, such as myself, who've trained over who knows how much time, for me, it's been all my life, in accessing extended sensory information. We're drawing from the field that I call the mind field.
Right.
And it's the mind field, by the way, that exists after physical death.
Well, let me ask you this, okay? The extended sensory perception, we're talking about telepathy, remote viewing, psychokinesis, precognition, correct?
Absolutely. All of those terms that you have used and more, because we're also talking about universal consciousness, the
Mm-hmm.
awareness that a person would get to when they're in deep, deep meditation,
Mm-hmm.
where they feel they are in contact with the God source, however they conceive of the God source, this ecstasy feeling that a person has when they're in that deep, deep, deep meditation, when they feel they're at one with the universe. That is the connection with the oneness, with the one.
I'm going to kind of throw a curve in here for a minute. Um, it has been said that all all information in the universe is contained within one field, and they call that the Akashic field. Is that a part of what we're talking about here?
Yes, that's one of the perspectives of it, one of the versions of understanding it. Yes, all information, all events, there is no past, present, or future in this shared mind field,
Mm-hmm.
because this is pure energy. There is not a past, present, or future until that pure energy is focused into matter. And when it focuses into matter in that blink of existence, it has a past, a present, a future, and it has a location, and it's solid.
So I remember having conversations with other researchers about this very thing, and um, one of them was Dr. Joel Lewis several years ago. I don't know where Dr. Lewis is at today, but he was a wonderful man. He wrote a book called The God Hypotheses, and I had a great conversation with him and the and Bob Dean years ago. Um, and that conversation dealt with, is consciousness, is human consciousness, is it local within the gray matter, or is it non-local from somewhere else? Are we just like radio receivers from for a signal coming from somewhere else?
Well, it is both, Jim. There is
Yeah.
the consciousness, which is the formed physical brain matter and all
Mhm.
of its functioning. And then there is the pure energetic, shall we say, field of energy that we are all part of. So there, it is both. And so we are constantly forming, reforming, forming, reforming, forming, reforming. And if we can allow ourselves to retain the consciousness from the mind field to some extent, we can bring that into the physical. And some of the greatest inventors people like Albert Einstein and Tesla and
Tesla
those
was the first.
individuals um, recognized that a lot of their ideas and their concepts were coming to them from elsewhere. All of us have consciousness that is constantly bombarding us from this field in which we're, shall we say, existing at this time.
Mhm.
And then after our physical bodies cease to be, the pure consciousness continues as rather mysterious force that continues to have identity that we call the soul. And of
Mhm.
course, there's a difference in the spirit and the soul. So there's very, very interesting levels of what I would call identity and organization in all of this.
That's fascinating. We just a few weeks ago we had an interview with a lady who had a near-death experience, and she spoke about an existence apart from her body. Now, there's been thousands, maybe millions of people who have experienced these near-death experiences, and they all pretty much say the same thing, that there's an existence outside of this body. And this is fascinating stuff, Kay. But let me ask you: have you always been aware of your extended sensory precognitions,
Well,
or
I
belief?
was fortunate enough to be raised by a family where intuition was honored, accepted, and promoted. My grandmother herself was a functioning psychic. She was a nurse, but she didn't have to work necessarily. So she spent full time with me. I'm an only child and only
Mhm.
grandchild. So I had the all full attention of these people. And grandmother trained me from the time I was little in how she was trained by her mother, who happened to come from Ireland and had what was called the second sight. And so I was told from the time I was little that I was psychic, that I had the second sight, and was taught various things from the very beginning about remote viewing and other things. We didn't call it those things in those days, but we just used it as just the way we functioned. You
Yeah,
would have loved my grandmother. Had she still been alive, she'd have been on your show. You would have loved her.
I love to have her on the show. I down through the years dealing with the issues and things that we dealt with during the time I was a director with MUFON. We dealt with all of this. And I mean, when you start investigating UFOs and matters of high strangeness, this stuff is front and center. This business of consciousness and extra consciousness and on and on. And I I think about all these different abilities that people have. Um, People that see colors around other folks, people that will look at you and see your aura, people that will look at you and perhaps see the spirit guide that is attached to you. I mean, this is amazing stuff, and I think it's well worth the time to talk and discuss. Um, how have
Now,
you built?
auric vision is particularly interesting if you want to discuss that, because um, many years ago, when
Mhm.
I was a graduate student in Berkeley, trying very hard, remember, after being raised in a family where intuition was fostered and everything, then I decided I really wanted to be a scientist, because I always knew from the time I was little I was going to be a scientist priestess, which is what I am. That's what I was going to be. So I had to decide what science. So it was biology I was going to do that. But when I got to Berkeley, they were very, very, very grounded in Newtonian stuff. And so one day I remember going into the library. I used to go and just lose myself in the library. There's so many things in that library at Berkeley. And I found a book on auras, the human aura. And I remember reading it and thinking, this is preposterous. I remember going back to the lab and just laughing about this thing. How is it that a book on such, absolute fantasy could be in our wonderful, prestigious library. Well, a few years later, in 1973, I was pregnant with my second child. Sure enough, I had a series of dreams in which a voice said to me, "We're going to teach you to see the aura." And I thought, okay, whatever. I just want to get this pregnancy finished. Let's not worry about this. But no, as soon as you have this child, you will begin to see the aura. Okay,
Mhm.
whatever. And sure enough, a couple of weeks after I had my baby, my husband and I were at a lecture, and I was looking up at this woman on the podium, and I could see this purple light around her head, and I thought there was a spotlight being shown on her. I kept looking in the back of the room. There's no spotlight. Where's this purple light coming from? And I gradually began to see more and more and more and more. So pretty soon I was seeing full body auras in full light around people. And I have my aura portrait. I perhaps
Oh,
will
do
share
you?
it with
Okay.
you. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, if you look, you have one of my books. You have the Inner Visions. You don't have my books on the Intuitive Career or my business card, but on my business card and also on my in my books on the Intuitive Career, you will find on the front there's a portrait, and that's my portrait that I painted back in 1978. I stood in front of the mirror and did a self-portrait with some of the colors that I see. They move, they swirl, they twirl. So I believe I came to see the aura just to spite myself because I had actually, poo-pooed it when I was trying so hard to be a mainline biologist.
Uh,
And then I discovered as a biological um, investigator, I said, well, I want to test this. I discovered I could see these colors in any different light and without light, and that I figured they're coming from the occipital lobes of the brain. In other words, if you sometimes have a dream and a dream in color, where are those colors coming from? Well, they're coming from your brain. So I believe that my auric vision is being generated by back in the brain in the occipital lobe area, because it's certainly not coming from any external thing I'm seeing, because I could see it in full light or in darkness or under colored light. I see other colors, which is impossible. In other words, under red light I would see the full spectrum of different colors.
so that's fascinating. But you also now here's a question that the lady who's working behind the scenes here, Patricia, uh, she's asking how does all of this work with people that have schizophrenia?
Okay, schizophrenia and many of the other, shall we say, problems, difficulties with the physical brain are issues with either transmitters, neurotransmitters, or some of the actual functioning of the physical brain. Now, sometimes the modern medical community will place certain extended sensory phenomena into the basket of pathology. And so there are some individuals whose, shall we say, neuronal wiring is such that they are picking up on extended sensory perception, and the people that are around them are sometimes misinterpreting that as pathology. But then there's some real pathology as well having to do with the neurotransmitter. So the term itself is not precise enough to really know, but I can tell you that a lot of the work that most psychics do would not be classified as normal brain functioning
Oh,
if it were. But the
people
thing
say
is
things like you're miswired
that
or something.
there you go.
Yeah.
However, but the thing is that we can actually, if we see something that's actually verifiable, it makes it hard for them to dismiss it as pathology. So there are problems with the brain. That's true, and some of them do lead to difficulties with thoughts. But there are also some bleed over from the mind field which can cause confusion, can cause apparitions, can cause things like auric vision.
It's the
That would be
physical
very
side of
Mhm.
of us.
Right.
I mean,
Right. So if I were to go to a typical psychiatrist and say, well, sir, I see, or madam, I see these colors coming out of people and they're going here, they probably would think that I was deranged in some way. So, yet it's very helpful in fields like medical intuition and other applications.
well, I like that. I like that term, medical intuition. Can you kind of go into that a little bit about what's going
Absolutely.
on?
Medical intuition is one of my specialties. It's a field which is emerging more and more. And I want to let your listeners know about our new website, NOMI, NOMI, medicalintuition.org. And they can go to that website and learn a lot more about this emerging field of medical intuition. When it's practiced as we practice it in NOMI, National Organization for Medical Intuition, it is a way of knowing using high sense perception or extended sensory perception what is going on within an individual's physical body or their energy field. It's not practicing medicine. So, medical intuition is not diagnosing or prescribing. That's very, very important, but it is defining what is happening. So I work with individuals, clients all over the world, literally remotely, and will use remote viewing, clairvoyance, to scan through the physical body to see what I am seeing, what I know of anatomy and physiology, having even taught human anatomy at some point in
Mhm.
my college career. And then I can determine actually all the way down to the level of the genetics. I have one client that I recently was working with, just trying to determine where some changes had occurred on which of his chromosomes. So actually going through and looking through the chromosomal array to see where certain changes had occurred in some of the chromosomes. So this is something which can provide a lot of very specific information about root causes of problems, physical problems that people
So
have.
yeah, that's interesting that the intuitive, medically intuitive person can sense. You're saying that the medically intuitive person can sense physical, structural
Absolutely,
problems.
that's what it is. Physical, structural issues that deviate from what we would expect to see. So I scan through a person's body. I'm looking at their bony structures. I'm looking at their muscles. I'm looking at their gut. I'm looking at the tissues, but also down to the molecular level. And as I say, down to the chromosomal level in some cases, to see what is going on. And a lot of detail about structures in the brain and other things for certain clients if they're interested in that. But it's not a diagnosis like yes, you have hemocus, so you've got this. I'm not a
Mhm.
physician. I've got a PhD, not an MD,
Right.
but I'm looking to say this looks this way to me or that looks that way to me, and you need to follow through with your physician or not or whatever, or consult with your healing team. And of course, I do work with some physicians also with some patients.
Now, do we see that in the modern day medical field at all? Do we see much of this going on where people intuitively come in? And I mean, I've never
Absolutely.
really. Okay.
Absolutely. And this is part of the research that our NOMI, National Organization for Medical Intuition, is doing, is to see how many practitioners are out there um, who are working with intuition on a regular basis and how that can happen, how it can happen legally, how it can happen in such a way that it's ethical. We want to apply strong ethical guidelines to this emerging field.
Well, wow, this is just as interesting as anything I've ever talked about. But I see a term here, bioplasmic field. Is that
Right.
the same? That's different than from the aura It,
That is a biological term. That's a more scientific term for the word aura. Um, you see, the actual field around us that could be called the aura or the
mhm.
bioplasmic field, it is composed of these tiny, tiny, tiny particles. I call them gravitons. They could be called whatever you want to call
Okay.
them. They are the subcomponents of electrons and protons, and they are popping into reality many times, billions of times per second, and they form a field out beyond the body that's more dense close to the body, and we call that the etheric body, and they move out the different layers. And then in that, there are lines of force called meridians that you would
Mhm.
hear about if you were to visit a Chinese physician, Oriental physician, talk about meridians. And where those meridians cross multiple times, like a network, they form vortices or whirlpools called chakras. And so we talk about the
That's what I was going to ask
chakras,
you.
right?
Yes.
But the
Interesting.
chakras are only a part of the larger bioplasmic field. But that's a physical thing. It's these tiniest components of matter are winking in and out of corporeality most densely, where, like, I'm seeing Jim now, and I see him appearing to be in one place, but out from beyond him for a various amount of distance, there are the tiniest amount of physical matter, the bioplasmic field. And that bioplasmic field leaves its traces, as does our DNA and everything
Mhm.
else, on everything we touch, everything, and what we think as well. So we leave traces of ourselves in the universe, and that's how, for instance, years ago, I worked with some archaeologists to try and help them find dig sites. And I was not the only psychic that was doing this. There were about 6 or 7 of us, and we didn't work together. We didn't know about each other or anything, but we just followed the traces in the bioplasmic field to find where they would be able to find artifacts. And they did. Um, so it's, you know, it's amazing how we leave an imprint on the physical world, not only from our DNA, which we leave everywhere, and a little bit of cell material and hair and stuff like that, but also our energy field. And this is the basis, of course, of hauntings.
Well, let me ask you this. People get their auras photographed. Other people see colors around other folks. What is why the color differences? What is
Well, there's a difference between those two things. The phenomenon called aura photography is photography of a force field, but it is not what I see. It doesn't look like the way I see. It might be a similar kind of field, but it doesn't look like what I see. What I see is in my own consciousness generated by my brain, a portion of my brain. An
ah,
aura photograph is a computerized kind of, um, it's done in an electrostatic field, and there are all kinds of technological improvements recently, and they're interesting. Um, to some extent based on Kirlian photography, but not limited to that. So it's a type of photography of a field in a highly electrified environment, very, very modified and brought to a high technological level. It's unfortunate to me that it's called aura photography, because then
mhm.
there gets to be this confusion of what we see necessarily versus what, but it's very valid and can be in the proper hands of people who know how to interpret it. It's excellent.
What what is a out of body experience?
Well, out of body experience is, as I understand it, is where an individual can literally project their attention into the mind field, just like remote viewing. When I do remote viewing, like sometimes I've done remote viewing for the sky watches after MUFON.
Exactly, yes.
And I would be at home in the comfort of my home, and you guys would be out there, on the desert and doing everything. And I would essentially be watching using remote viewing. If I did out of body projection, that takes it a further step where I might manifest physically there. And I don't claim to do that or be able to do that. By location and out of body experiences definitely do exist with some people, but it has to do with manifesting the physical consciousness elsewhere. But these are all part of extended awareness.
Well, that's interesting. I'm having some problems with my microphone. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. And I was going to ask you about that, about the remote viewing. Are we actually sending our conscious? Are we tapping into another area of our consciousness when we do the remote viewing? This is sort of confusing with me. Okay.
Okay,
And
as I practice it, what I'm doing is I'm clearing my physical brain consciousness
mhm.
and allowing the mind field consciousness with focus. In other words, this is very important. I have to set my intention to be at a particular place, to be at a particular time, even though there's no time in the mind field. And then I bring back to the physical brain those impressions. So it's an extension of what I do in the scientific and technical intuition, an extension of what I do with the medical intuition, very much the same. I'm looking at a physical event that's far away from me.
So let me get this right. You're tapping into this non-local conscious
Right.
state.
Mhm. Through intention.
So isn't that,
Intention is very, very important.
this is a hard topic for me to trying to clarify my question. It's hard
Yeah.
enough, because this stuff fascinates me because, I have been on a few of those times when you and your team have been on the other side of town while the MUFON team, many of us were 90 miles away.
Right.
And the following day you send an email to us. Here's what I saw you guys doing last night. And so many times you've been spot on. And
Remember the time the person spilled the coffee? Remember that?
Yes. Well, I was going to say, how would you possibly know that? This is empirical data. Okay.
And I also saw the
guess.
person wandering into the meeting. Remember, I saw him wandering
Yes, that
through
fellow
the
that
desert
just
and
that fellow
coming
that just
in.
right.
Oh, yeah. Right.
That guy that just came into our circle. We had about 30 people out there, and there was this gentleman who just walked in from nowhere.
He walked across the desert. I watched him.
Yes, and I'll tell you, that just floored me, Kay. That you knew that from 90 miles away, or however far away you live from where we were doing our Skywatch that night. I was just amazed. So let's getting back to some of these colors and things again. This stuff, we could talk for hours on this, but the chakras, okay?
Yes.
The chakras, apparently, when I see pictures of the human chakras, I see different colors representing different areas of your chakra. And is there a reason for the the violet, the blue, the red, the yellow.
Well, there are conventions that have been used over the years to be associated with the different chakras. And usually they go from red as the basal chakra, then orange, then yellows,
Mhm.
and we go up. These are conventions. When
Okay.
I'm looking at the chakras, I am looking at a multiple of colors that are swirling. When I'm looking at the energy field called the bioplasmic field, I am looking mainly at the emotional level. I see blotches of colors that move and swirl and twirl. So those blotches of colors are moving and swirling and twirling all around very rapidly. Um, and so it's one of the best authors is, of course, Barbara Brennan. Her book Hands of Light and Light Emerging. These are wonderful. These are great. They give artist renditions of these things if anybody wishes to study them further.
Okay. So, okay, in lieu of everything we've briefly talked about here, um, what sort of advice would you give to someone who is kind of like reluctant or afraid to explore their extended sensory abilities, like remote viewing?
Well, of course, I think it's good to
Hmm.
study people who are in the field who are ethical and actually have a good track record. But practice, 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 and being patient with yourself and allowing yourself to develop these abilities because they're like anything else. It's like learning to play the piccolo or to play tennis or anything. You're not going to do it overnight. You're going to work at it. You're going to learn the principles of it, and then you're going to practice with feedback and with people giving you some idea of whether, okay, this was spot on and this was off, and because you're not all going to be 100% accurate ever. So it's a matter of practice and study and enjoying yourself because it's fun.
Yeah,
That's the
should we
most
be?
important
Should
thing.
I mean? Should people be afraid of it? I mean, I remember one. Let me just mention. I remember one time, and I don't know why this happened to me. I've always been sort of um, what is it, a left brain thinker. That is the more hard science. I don't really let emotions rule my thoughts. Um, I had an experience one night where I actually seemed to have uh, propelled myself in time. It could have been a very vivid dream, okay,
Hmm.
but it scared me. It scared me so bad that I thought that this whole business of remote viewing and out of experiences and things are something that you don't really want to fool with because number one, it's real. Number two, it's maybe something you don't want to get involved with. But is there ever has have you ever heard of any situations where people have maybe harmed themselves by doing these sort of exercises and practices?
Absolutely. I think it's like any kind of intellectual activity. I have
Hmm.
known people who have harmed themselves with typical everyday thought activities. If they go off the deep end with
No,
them
good
and
point.
become
Yes.
extreme with them, you want to never lose track of common sense and of the sense that you want to pay attention to whatever's coming out of your mouth or whatever you are perceiving and pass it through the filter of common sense and good logic. I feel a person must keep their feet on the ground and be grounded. I work
Hmm.
with prayer. I work with setting my intention, of course, for the greater good. And I believe spirituality, not necessarily dogmatic religion, but spirituality is
Right.
our best guideline in that regard. That's why I think we just have to all be very, very um, careful and cognizant, not only of what we're doing that's something exotic like remote viewing, but of our everyday thought processes, because we can get into all kinds of thought ruts that are not good.
Yeah, right. That leads me to this question I have here. Um, what role do science, metaphysics, spirituality, religion, if you will, play in the understanding of human or non-human consciousness? What?
I'm so glad you asked that, because that's a central question to our culture.
Mhm.
First of all, science and religion should never be pitted against each other. They cover different realms of understanding. Science is all about what is happening, when is it happening, who is doing it, what are they doing? It's measurement. It's those questions we can ask about what, when, who. Religion is about why. It's not only religion, but spirituality, metaphysics asks the whys of things. Why am I here? What is my higher purpose?
Mhm.
Those things. But where we get into trouble, and I think this is true in our society, it happens, is when either side, either of these perspectives starts getting into questions that's beyond their realm. When science starts trying to answer the whys, and they come up, well, there's nothing going on other than the who, what, where. And religion, as we know in the past, has got into the who, what, and where, and come up with some things that, science clearly has shown to not be the case. But if we
Yeah,
can understand that they're talking about different things, so when we're talking about consciousness, we can definitely talk about the phenomenon of thought and extended sensory perception. That doesn't answer why. He doesn't
exactly.
understand, and it never will understand, so the whys have to be that deeper metaphysical connection to what I call the pattern. And here's how I see it, Jim, just kind of in a nutshell, that if all matter is winking in and out of corporeality at billions of seconds of time, why does it stay the same? In other words, if you have salt in your salt shaker at home on your table, it's sodium chloride, salt. Why is it always salt? Why doesn't it change into something else? And we know things
Good
decay
point.
and they change, but from
Yeah,
second to second, they are the same. And that is what I call the mind of God. That, however you want to define it, it's the universal pattern of manifestation. And that is something that science cannot define. It is something which is defined by the metaphysics of it.
that was the tenor of my next question. Can you tell me the difference between science and metaphysics?
And that's what I was just saying.
That just
That,
what
that
you were
this
just
is what
saying.
it is. So the science will say, yes, it winks in and out of corporeality, and they
Hmm.
define exactly how it happens and all of this. They can never say why. And then the metaphysics takes it up from there and says, and this is why it happens. And this is the manifestation force behind the whole thing, the big plan, the great pattern. And this is why people like Einstein said, you can't study science without coming to spirituality, coming to a recognition that there is a big plan. You might not be able to understand it. I don't claim to understand the big plan. I don't claim to understand fully this unseen force which makes everything manifest the same and keeps it all going. But I know it's there.
A final question here, Kay, because we're just about out of time. And I see, like what I said, this hour goes by very fast. Um, spirituality and consciousness. As a minister,
Hmm.
Reverend Cay Randell-May, And this may be a loaded question. Do you think consciousness is eternal?
Oh, of
Do you
course it
think?
is.
Do you think
Absolutely.
we have?
Totally. I
Okay.
know it is. I know it is. And I
Okay.
can tell you that it's been shown to me also through my intuitive work. Because years ago, and I'll just make it very short, I was doing a series of studies for medical intuition, in which all I was given by a particular physician was a number. I didn't know anything else about this, and there was no physician there with me or anything. Only my scientific colleagues, and I ordinarily would see clearly in my inner mind what's going on with that person. But in this case, all I saw was a light, a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant light. And I was told, this person is in remission. This person is healthy. We're preparing a party for this person. Everything is fine. And I said that, and it was written down and sent to the physician, who graded it later and said, you were wrong. Then a few days later, he called up and said, well, what time did you do this? And he said that person had just died. That person died of ovarian cancer. And I saw
Wow.
the light. I saw the light. And yes, she was in remission. Yes, she had just died. And yes, they were preparing a party for her. And I saw this intuitively. I remote viewed it.
That's fascinating stuff, and that opens so many other doors and topics that I want to ask you and talk to you about, but we're out of time, Kay.
Perhaps at another time when we
We
can
will
make
get together and do another part with Dr. Cay Randell-May. I want to delve into a little bit about this eternal consciousness and
Absolutely.
spirituality, and I want to come at it from a scientific perspective, from a scientific viewpoint. But it's been a fast hour, and we're out of time. So
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate
Kay,
being here.
thank you so much for being on our program, and to all of our listeners out there. What all I can say is, Kay, one more time, will you tell the listeners what websites, what books that they might want to
You can just
investigate?
come to my website, cayrandallmay.com, and it's CAYRANDALLMAY.com, and you'll see a lot about me and my upcoming events and how to get in touch with me. I do readings with people all over the world, and look forward to getting to meeting you.
That's perfect, and that's a great place to jump off here. And so I want to thank all of our listeners. I certainly want to thank you, Dr. Randell-May. And so until next week, when we have another interesting guest, I want to say thank you on behalf of Dr. Cay Randell-May and on behalf of Patricia Wilkinson, my program manager. I am your host, Jim Mann. Thank you for joining us here on KGRA's digital broadcast, Dark Window. See you next week. I hope you can tune in. Thank you and have a good night.